Formula One is finally back in the Netherlands after a 36-year hiatus, and what a tactical battle we saw, with it not being clear as to which strategy would come out on top, and Mercedes trying everything in the book to get Hamilton out in front. Here's my 5 things we learned from the Dutch Grand Prix. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. The Zandvoort track is an awesome test for a Formula One car. The track at Zandvoort has been awesome to watch all weekend, and yes, it didn't produce too many overtakes, but when cars did overtake each other, it was always a gutsy move. It did offer a tactical battle similar to that of what we saw in France earlier this year, so for me, it's a green box for the Zandvoort circuit, especially for being such a unique track compared to the others on the current calendar. The crowd was so exciting to watch, and even seeing it on TV, you could see the electric atmosphere at the circuit. I think everyone loved to see it whether you support Max Verstappen or not. I don't think I've ever seen this much passion from a crowd as they saw Verstappen race at his first Grand Prix in the country. There were some doubts over the shortest pit lane of the year, but with the pit boxes being significantly closer than the other circuits, that just added to the action. It was so tight in that section that there was an additional tactical element to taking a pit stop, with the tyre degradation being higher than expected and limited practice session running, meaning that teams had even less information as well. It gave us a fascinating Grand Prix. And then you have the banking. The high line that the drivers took through turn 3 was crazy to watch, and the final turn 14 on the main straight was something we haven't seen in Formula 1 for years. Watching this Grand Prix on TV was such a spectacle. I'd love to see more banking on other circuits in the future, as it allows the drivers to carry more speed into the corners and it changes the forces on the drivers' bodies as they race at full speed around this track. A win for Verstappen was the outcome that the vast majority of the crowd would have wanted, and I'm sure they'll be celebrating long on into the evening after a great result for their driver. For me, it feels like an instant classic, and I would love to go to this race one day just to witness the unbelievable atmosphere that the Dutch crowd brings. Verstappen in a class of his own. A theme of the 2021 season so far has been looking at the battle of the number 2 drivers. Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez have both been relatively disappointing so far in 2021, and whenever one of them drops back, it leaves their teammate vulnerable at the front. On this occasion, it was Perez out of it after a disappointing qualifying session, followed by a replacement engine putting him back to a pit lane start. It then looked like Bottas was relatively out of it as well, until around lap 30 where it was clear he was going for the one stop and Verstappen was on his tail on fresher tyres, with the Mercedes driver doing all he can to slow Verstappen down and leave him in the hands of Lewis Hamilton. As soon as Max was between the 2 Mercedes drivers, he was vulnerable, but realistically Bottas was a sitting duck, and it didn't take too long for Max to get past the Finnish driver. And once this happened, Hamilton was slightly closer, but not quite close enough to challenge the Dutchman at the front. After the second pit stop period, there was a mistake from Mercedes as they jumped the gun a bit early in order to try the undercut on Max, but Hamilton ended up in traffic and was then touch and go on tyres towards the end of the race. It ended with Hamilton chasing down the Dutchman during the final stint, despite calls from the pit wall to slow down to save those tyres. And it was Max who was comfortable at the front once Hamilton's tyres dropped off, and the Dutchman was in a field of his own all weekend and thoroughly deserved this race victory. So even though the Mercedes team threw everything at Max and did have 2 drivers that could influence the front of the order, they couldn't get past the Red Bull out at the front. This says a lot about Max's talent and how good their car was this weekend. Verstappen has retaken the lead of the championship, and surely at this point it's his to lose. He has the strongest car, and I think he's probably favourite going into every Grand Prix now. I almost believe it can only be grid drops from engine penalties that could stop him at this stage. So he is thoroughly deserving of a green box for a stellar performance this weekend in front of a home crowd. Pierre Gasly, a great weekend again. What will it take for Gasly to prove himself to Red Bull? If that's what the Frenchman wants, then what more could he do? A 4th place finish, with his teammate retiring after running 15th, with the Frenchman achieving the same spot in qualifying on Saturday. The AlphaTauri driver has done a fantastic job of getting himself to the top of the midfield once again and then holding it there in the race, so it's obviously a green box for the Frenchman after that result. Most of the job was done for Gasly after lap 1, where he controlled his car into turn 3 to ensure he remained ahead of the 2 Ferraris. Once that was done, he was in a nice gap, running 4th, and was barely seen on the TV footage as he was in no man's land. But this is the kind of result that should be putting him in good stead for his future in Formula 1. He's had a fantastic year for the team and is proving his worth once again. And I've said it in my latest video, he's unlikely to get that call to return to Red Bull in the next couple of years, as there will always be that memory of poor performances that he put in when he was there in 2019, and the fact that he's now driving with less pressure on his shoulders. But regardless, Gasly's now scored 66 points this season and is in 8th position in the standings, a great place to be. If he's able to keep that seat in AlphaTauri, then that's fantastic news, but I'm sure Pierre Gasly will want to find a way to secure his long-term future in the sport by getting a move out of the Red Bull-owned seats on the grid. I think everyone will agree he deserves that, but time will tell on that one. A positive weekend for Ferrari. Ferrari have had a solid weekend at Zandvoort. Their car looks strong, with Charles Leclerc topping FP2 on Friday with Carlos Sainz in second. This was sadly not a sign of things to come, as it would have been awesome to see the Ferrari cars in the mix at the front as they were in Monaco. But regardless, a P5 and P7 finish is good for the team, as they've had a good points haul over the McLaren team that they're locked in a close battle with for third in the Constructors' Championship this year. The Papaya team scored just a single point from this afternoon's race, so it's a green box for the Ferrari team as they head towards their home Grand Prix next weekend. Despite a disappointing crash in FP3 for Carlos Sainz, the team did a great job to get his car repaired and ready for qualifying, and they qualified well. These tight and twisty circuits are working particularly well for the Italian team's car, with Leclerc ending up on top more often than not. Sainz's race was a bit disappointing as he ended up so far behind his teammate on track, with the gap being more than 30 seconds despite having the same strategy. And in the end, he lost out to the Alpine driver of Fernando Alonso in the closing laps, which was probably a bit of a disappointing result for the Spanish driver. Overall though, I'm sure Ferrari will be pleased given they now have an 11.5 point advantage over McLaren. The end of the road for Kimi Raikkonen. And the final point to talk about for the Dutch Grand Prix is about a driver who didn't even race this weekend. Kimi Raikkonen announced his retirement from the sport at the end of this season. The Finnish driver has had an awesome career in Formula 1, spanning over 20 years. The champion has openly admitted that in recent times he's only been racing in the sport as a hobby, but he's still done well at times to compete with some of the fastest drivers on the grid. His retirement has opened the door for the driver market, which will likely see Valtteri Bottas take his seat in Alfa Romeo and George Russell getting the nod for Mercedes for next season. It's a huge move, but I think we can all appreciate what the Finnish driver has offered and what this means for the future. He didn't end up racing this weekend after a positive COVID test put him out of action and in isolation. Robert Kubica stepped up for his 98th Grand Prix and didn't really do anything special after very limited practice running. It was a real shame to see Kimi not race this weekend after his announcement, but he will be back before the season finishes and we'll be able to see him in more races over the course of the season. So we need to make sure we enjoy the final races with Raikkonen on the grid, and it's a green box this weekend to recognise Raikkonen's career in the sport. Honourable mentions. First up on honourable mentions, it has to be for the fact that Bottas simply didn't listen to the team and went for the fastest lap, forcing Hamilton to dive into the pits to take the fastest lap back from Bottas at the end. It was a move that showed that whilst he's happy to move aside for Hamilton on track, Bottas still wants to score as many points as possible and probably doesn't care too much given he's been dropped by the Mercedes team for next season. Then, I think Giovinazzi has also earned a mention as he managed to put his Alfa Romeo car 7th on the grid in qualifying. How he managed that, I simply don't know. It didn't last in the end, with the Italian driver dropping back early on, and then a puncher dropping him further down the order. But it sounds like his time in Formula 1 could well be coming to an end unless he's able to achieve these kinds of results in the back end of the season in both qualifying and the races. So that's my 5 things we learned from the Dutch Grand Prix. A very positive video from me with 5 green boxes for the first time ever. But quite frankly, I think I'm happy to see a race weekend actually happen with a positive atmosphere and safe and clean racing. We've not seen that for quite a while. Thanks for watching, let me know your thoughts in the comments and be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and hit the subscribe button if you're new.